Welcome to another episode of A Fistful of Lenses. In this episode, I'd like to invite you to come on a journey with me. It's a journey that began with me searching for optical perfection and ended up with me arriving at a place where I've embraced a totally different mindset. What made the change was me remembering an old lesson I'd learned from a very old artist decades ago, only to forget and have to relearn. But when I applied this to photography, it rekindled my mojo. What on earth am I talking about? Well, let's find out. So for this episode, I'll be using a collection of cameras and lenses, some of which are modern-ish, but most of which are very old indeed. And as usual, I'll be showing the video and stills straight out of camera, without any editing or colour grading. So you get to see the strengths, weaknesses, and true character undisguised. In this episode, I'll be trying to explain the biggest benefit I got from going vintage. It brings me back to that lesson I'd learned decades ago that I totally lost sight of. But before we get too arty-farty, let's take a look at one of those lenses that will feature in this episode. The lens is the Nikon 105mm f2.5 AIS that photographer Steve McCurry used to capture the famous image of the Afghan girl that featured on the cover of the National Geographic magazine in 1985. Incidentally, 1985 was also the year when I first learned this powerful lesson, only to forget it and have to relearn it later on. So let's put all this into some historical context and remind ourselves of what the world was like in 1985 by taking a trip together down memory lane. In 1985, the biggest hit on the UK music scene was The Power of Love by Jennifer Rush. And in the cinemas, we were queuing to watch Back to the Future. At least I was. I also remember 1985 because of my uncle, Theodore. He was an incredibly vain man who had had so many facelifts that his belly button ended up on his forehead. And public decency dictated that he was forced to wear a scarf even during the hottest of summers. Anyway, that was the world in 1985. So as we start looking at images I got with various lenses, let's continue my journey from searching for optical perfection to embracing a totally different mindset. Because there was a time when I had a bad case of pixel peepingitis. I would pore over my images at over 100%, obsessing about edge sharpness, colour fringing, and chromatic aberration. I would watch endless reviews that showed pictures of test charts that convinced me that the lenses I owned were of no use. Maybe you can relate to this. The result for me was, where I'd always been fascinated by the natural world and enjoyed photography, now I stayed indoors looking at a screen. When I did go out with a camera, it was no longer enjoyable. I was trying to capture the world perfectly. My camera gear started gathering dust. Photography became stressful rather than relaxing. So that was the problem. Now we come to the fix. I can only try to explain the lesson I learned by helping you picture what this old artist was like. He had actually spent much of his working life as a coal miner. He was bent double and scarred from his time working at the coalface. On bad days, he needed oxygen because of the dust on his lungs. But he was also an incredible artist and one of the most generous men I've ever met. He was a fascinating man that would tell me stories of his work in life, and mid-sentence would illustrate what he meant by sketching the scene. I was amazed at his ability to, with a few strokes of the pencil, evoke the feeling of working in the claustrophobic, dimly lit mine. It was perfect for me, as it nurtured my interest in art and history, an interest that has continued to this day. But these quick sketches impressed me greatly. I would go home and do my own versions of a miner working. I would spend hours getting every detail perfect, and then the following week bring my picture hidden in my pocket, and without telling him, secretly compare it to his latest sketch explaining some aspect of mining. Mine, although accurate and detailed, lacked something in comparison to his. I would go home frustrated and spend even more time making an even more detailed sketch. The following week, the same result. It was puzzling. His weren't detailed at all, just a suggestion of a miner's grimacing face, leaving your imagination to fill in the rest. It finally clicked. His sketches were capturing a mood. I was getting more and more bogged down and fixated on details. The beauty of his sketches were the movement he captured, along with the oppressive, claustrophobic feeling, the grimness of it all. Mine were all about getting the details of the Tilly lamp right, the miner's features perfectly represented. Mine were exhausting to produce, and his were effortless. And the result was, mine were cold and sterile, and his were full of life. This brings us to years later, when I realised I started making the same mistake, this time with my photography. I thought about some of my favourite photos from Henri Cartier-Bresson. When I look at them closely, they aren't perfectly sharp, but that doesn't stop me from being moved by them. They perfectly capture a mood or a moment in time. They convey a feeling. And that's why vintage lenses in particular have helped me to stop pixel peeping or trying to capture a perfect image with every detail pin sharp. The lenses aren't perfect, so that would be impossible. So it forces you to focus on the bigger picture, the overall effect that the complete image has on you. Does it move you in some way? And it's still a work in progress, but it's kept photography enjoyable. And also, it keeps it interesting, as each vintage lens has its own character or subtle difference. And the result is, I'm out there taking more photos. I'm starting to enjoy photography again. Of course, a vintage lens is not going to be a good fit for every genre of photography. If I was shooting wildlife, I'd love to use an all-singing, all-dancing 600mm f4. But for anything that's more about capturing the mood, it could be the perfect fit. If it wasn't, why would Quentin Tarantino have gone to great pains to find the actual lenses used for the Ben-Hur chariot race to film his movie Hateful Eight? Surely it wasn't because of financial constraints. But for most of us, the real benefit is about enjoying our photography. Each vintage lens gives a subtle, different look, which can keep things interesting. So if you lost your photographic mojo, if you're suffering from pixel peepinitis, dust off that old lens, and for a while, forget about trying to capture perfection, and instead, try and capture a mood. Have fun, and get back out there, in the real world. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe and ring that bell. And then who knows, maybe we'll see each other out there in the real world, snapping away happily with a fistful of lenses. Until next time, bye for now.